Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of ESG Watch, a new webcast series here at the Conference Board that addresses pressing topics in corporate governance, sustainability, corporate citizenship, and philanthropy. I'm Paul Washington, Executive Director here at the ESG Center of the Conference Board, which is the world's leading independent nonprofit think tank addressing issues facing business and society for over 100 years. The Conference Board is a 501c3 organization. As such, we're committed not only to serving our members, but also to society at large. I'd encourage you to visit our resources on our website addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the broader issues of economic opportunity, social cohesion, and racial inequality and injustice facing our society today. Today, we're going to focus on the very important topic of how boards are addressing the current health, economic, and social crises facing the United States, and what the longer-term implications are for corporate boards across industries and across sizes. I'm really delighted to be joined by three experts for our discussion today. I'd like to welcome Ross Jeffries, who's Deputy General Counsel and Corporate Secretary at Bank of America. Welcome, Ross.
Thank you, Paul.
Great. And Rusty O'Kelly, who is co-leader of the Board and CEO Advisory Practice at Russell Reynolds Associates. Welcome, Rusty.
Thank you.
And Paul Rodell, a partner at the law firm of Debevoise and Plimpton. Welcome, Paul.
Pleasure. Thank you, Paul.
Great. Now, before we begin, I've got a few housekeeping notes to cover. First, we are offering, and this is really the gripping part of the presentation today. After this, you can just tune out. So first, we're offering CPE credit for participating in today's live program. To get this credit, you need to enter your full name, email address, and specify CPE in the request CPE credit space at the bottom of your screen. Please note that 3 pop-up messages will occur during the program to confirm your participation. Please click OK each time you see one of those pop-ups, and you'll need to stay online for the entire webcast. Second, I want to underscore that we really appreciate and encourage audience participation in today's session. All of you who are watching today can ask questions at any time by entering them into the chat box at the bottom left of your screen. We'll work them into conversation as best as we can, and we'll answer any remaining questions at the end of the webcast. Finally, a few other notes. As you saw in the cool intro video, you can download additional background materials in the download section at the bottom of your screen. You can enlarge the screen if you want to see us even more clearly to full screen view by clicking on the 4 arrows in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And you can share this program with your colleagues after the fact, and we really encourage you to do so as it'll be available on demand in about 24 hours. A couple more notes. Please complete the evaluation form at the end of today's session. It'll only take a few minutes, but it really will allow us to incorporate your feedback into our programs and make them even better in the future. And finally, I think most of us know this because we're all baby Zoomers these days, but for you to have the best possible experience, please close any other apps on your computer right now. This will help to minimize any connectivity issues. And if you still experience AV issues, please close the application and join again. So now with that really important part out of the way, let's talk about how boards are addressing the really unprecedented times. And I don't use that term lightly. These really are unprecedented times that we're living in, given the confluence of crises facing us, particularly in the United States. So as background for our discussion, let me provide you with a few highlights from a survey that the Conference Board, in collaboration with Russell Reynolds and Debevoise and Plimpton, conducted of 236 companies in May. You know, the survey found that boards, at least in the initial phase, were generally rising to the challenge of addressing the COVID crisis. The majority of boards were meeting or communicating with management at least every week. 96% of them at that point had addressed COVID with their board. And boards were really focusing, as you can see here, on the key issues initially of liquidity, their workforce, including their employees, and their operations. But we also found in this report that things were going to have to change. And actually, in some ways, shutting down the initial phase was the easy phase, and reopening would be a lot harder. If you look at this chart, you can see that 3 items that are at the bottom of the priority list, customers, cybersecurity, and corporate social responsibility, we thought then and we think now, and we really see now, are really needing to move up the list of priorities that boards need to address. So their list of priorities is just expanding, with really all 11 on this list becoming important. We also found that, as we looked at this, that, as you'll see in the next slide, that the role of the board was likely going to need to evolve. In the initial phase, boards could really let management run the show, you know, and as they probably are now too. But boards are really functioning in an advisory capacity, and that they really weren't doing as much decision-making and oversight. Well, now that we're farther into this, more boards are making more decisions, and they're exercising more vigorous oversight of management. So, Ross, with all that as background, you know, you're right there in the boardroom at one of the leading companies in this country. You know, how have you seen the priorities evolve that your board is addressing? How have you seen the role of the board evolve as we've moved through the health crisis, the economic crisis, and now the social crisis? And then, quite candidly, how does the board do it all right now? I mean, these really are unprecedented times. How does your board and how should a board stay on top of things?
Well, thank you, Paul. That's a good question. How do they do it all? You know, any one of these issues that we've faced in the last few months would be enough of a crisis, and then to have, you know, so many on top of each other and things that feed off of each other. You know, one leads to another, and it is a lot, and it's a lot to ask for the board. But that's what their job is, and that's what they're there to do. And you know, our role, my role as corporate secretary, is to help facilitate that and establish an environment where there's a process to get through all of these things, and you know, information flow, and to allow them the space and the time they need to deliberate on a lot of these important issues. The slide that you had, I believe it was before this one, that showed the list of things. You know, at Bank of America, our board had considered just about every one of those items except for the M&A and the shareholder activism. Although we were, you know, the initial part of the crisis involved in a proxy solicitation, you know, for our annual shareholders meeting. Not quite the same as you know, a shareholder activism, but proxy solicitation nonetheless. So, you know, at Bank of America, this list is pretty representative. Some things are top of the screen, you know, at different times, and in the initial parts of the crisis, certainly liquidity, our workforce, and frankly, you know, when there was a lot more uncertainty in how the markets were going to operate before, you know, massive governmental and Federal Reserve and foreign regulatory initiatives. There was, you know, just a lot of uncertainty in how markets were going to operate, and those were, you know, kind of top of mind. How do we get our workforce home? How do we certainly get our high-risk employees at home and keep them there? Right now, we're operating about 80% of our workforce is working from home. We are a critical industry, so we do have to keep our financial centers open. We've got to keep call centers open. We have to keep our trading floor open. And so, you know, we do have a good bit of our employees, you know, in the office. And so the board is engaged in how to, the right way to keep their safety and health in mind. And, you know, as we've gone through and We've gotten used to working at home. Our operational resilience has worked. And as you know, the events have evolved. You know, liquidity, which was top of mind at first, and capital is, we feel confident about that, and it's not no longer number one. You know, other things are moving up the list, and for us, certainly the social unrest that we've seen in the last few weeks, and our response to that, and in our communities, and how we for our own employees, as well as our communities, how we respond to that has gotten a lot more board attention.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like you're finding the board is able to do it all. I assume you're building more flexibility into your agendas for board meetings to have for things that come up at the last minute, I would assume.
Yes. You know, early on, we moved to a posture where, you know, obviously we've had our, you know, kind of set board meetings we've had them set a couple of years in advance, and we still have those, but we've layered in ad hoc board calls. We've obviously gone to a virtual setup rather than in-person meetings, and we've also instituted a much more aggressive effort in written communication, providing additional information in between board meetings, and so it's very very thoughtful process on keeping the flow of information on all of the items that we talked about earlier, and doing it regularly, and making sure that the board has access to management if there are questions.
So it's definitely gone beyond the contours of a regular board meeting. There's just not enough time to address this all during that time. Let me turn to the next sort of key findings that we had for what's ahead. It's a couple slides ahead where we talked about crisis management. And you know, our survey found that 2/3 of the companies didn't think they had adequate business continuity plans when they were facing COVID. That's not entirely a surprise. About half of those had started to address them. The other half still had it on their to-do list. But what was also really interesting was that 60% of the companies said that they hadn't reviewed their CEO or executive succession plans yet. And you know, there's both your emergency succession plans, there's your regular succession plans. Rusty, this is your wheelhouse among many others. What's your reaction to this? What should boards be thinking about doing right now when it comes to executive succession planning?
Well, it's interesting to look at this and think about the time, because I think when these questions were first asked in April, I think boards were drinking from a fire hose. We have certainly seen a significant increase in boards beginning to ask about the succession plans. We're hearing a lot of commentary that we've seen different levels of performance among executives, and now is the time to look at the succession plan. Mm-hmm. Our advice is, if you are not looking at your succession plan by the fall, something is wrong, because you will have seen varying levels of performance. In some cases, we are seeing executives really stepping up, really doing a great job, and their boards have expressed great confidence in them. In others, we have seen them express concern, and in several cases at the CEO level, even begin to conduct what we call quiet market scans, where they realize they do not have the talent they need, either as the sitting CEO or future CEO, and want to know the future talent they can bring in. What we found is that in usually the year of the crisis, there's not a lot of significant change at the CEO or CFO level, but the year after and the following year, there's often much more change.
Right. So a couple of years out, some real change. And one thing that we're seeing now, and I don't know if you're finding this in terms of boards' concerns about CEO's response, but a CEO can't be someone who just likes to hide out in their corner office right now. There's a degree of of engagement that they need to have with multiple constituencies, including employees, that may be somewhat different of set of skills and, characteristics than has been traditional. So I'm just kind of curious, are there areas that are sort of flat spots is that one of them, or are there others that are sort of flat spots that are coming up right now?
Empathy and engagement are two of the critical leadership behaviors that we're seeing. Yeah. And we're seeing that the CEOs who are most successful, or the presidents and COOs who are aspiring to CEO, but the entire executive leadership team, those members that are most successful are displaying engagement, which means they're out talking to people, their employees, their other stakeholders, because there's nothing worse than a lack of information. And particularly giving people honest assessments of where the company is, and what are the potential opportunities as well as the potential problems. And the other is empathy. If one thing this crisis has taught us, this is a crisis about people. Think about the number of sick people. Think about the number of people who are having to, as I've heard CEOs say, I never thought I'd have to worry about schools and childcare. Mm-hmm. But it's now a significant issue because it affects how much of their workforce can come back or how productive people are at home. And so that empathy, listening to your stakeholders, particularly your employees, making sure your teams are doing that, those are skills that boards are now looking at and realizing, we haven't given those enough credit.
That's really interesting. Okay, so that is in line with some of our observations, and something actually board members also have to have, frankly, during this phase. Paul, let's talk about how boards can make sure that they've got adequate reporting systems. You saw the list before, so it's liquidities, employee health and safety, supply chain reliability, legal challenges, including as well now an appropriate increased focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So boards are going to need to have, it seems to me, additional reporting systems in place. And even if they had some reporting systems, they're going to have to basically pay a lot more attention to them than they had in the past. So what are you seeing thus far at Debevoise in terms of companies enhancing their reporting systems to help stay on top of these multiple crises? I mean, Ross talked about additional written communications, but it seems like you got to actually have some sort of formal reporting and monitoring systems in place, and maybe even some additional policies along the way.
Yes, I'm going to take a different tack on it. I think I get to the same place, but from a legal perspective, I think I look at this and say the systems are in place, and for public companies coming through Sarbanes-Oxley and Dodd-Frank, and Ross knows it being in financial services, there are a lot of reporting systems in place. And so if I double back, and again, this is the lawyering, and come back to the commercial perspective, but from the legal perspective, thinking about the processes that are in place, that are documented, they're even audited in some cases. Then I think then sort of say, well, okay, if I take my cue then away from the SEC, right, as they've given guidance to public companies throughout the COVID-19 crisis, if you read the various guidance that's come up for public companies, there are no new principles in there. They're all the old principles, but it is taking the old principles applied to a new and very fast-changing crisis, or let's call them crises, right, to stay on top of them, but they're the same principles. So as I look and sort of advising my clients and sort of talking to my partners, what we're looking at is not to layer on more reporting systems and more reports. We've got sort of a broad swath that's covered, but it is to sort of pause and take a look at what we set out to do. And again, this is thinking as the regulatory lawyer here, but where I don't want to end up is setting out to do something in a policy and then falling short on a specific issue, right? So what I'd like to do is take a look at what I've got in place and really thinking hard about how this overlays against the current environment, which changes quickly, and what those reports that we're producing today need to say, and then sort of building off of those and saying, okay, now let's go with what we've got, whether it's committees or reports, and leverage off of those, because in many cases, those are things we just have to do. So how can those keep up with what we set out to do? One twist on this, you saw cyber at the bottom of the list, but this is not as easy as it sounds in some cases. Like we have clients, sort of artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? Wouldn't even come to mind as part of the crisis, right? But as we think about it with our data security efforts here at Voice, you come back to points like, well, everyone's, you have fewer employers, you have fewer employees, you're asking them to do more. So how are you applying AI? You are potentially now competing globally, right? So how are you going to use AI? And the thing is, against the backdrop of all of these and more sort of the AI topics, you've got the New York Department of Financial Services, you've got FINRA, who are more interested about how you're using AI. So just an example, but it is that sort of careful thought in terms of what we've set out to do and really thinking through the current environment. I think before you try to put more procedures in place and more policies and reports, just how are we going to apply it to the facts?
Right. And in some cases, your data that you may be collecting is are data on employee health, which you might not have collected in the same way before, employee family situations, if they've got a family member who's at high risk and so forth. So there's a whole lot of extra data. Plus, people are working remotely. There's a whole new set of challenges that you have in making sure that the company's data are protected. So yeah, it's definitely taking a fresh look at what you're telling your board, what you're looking at in terms of data security, and building that into your tracking and your reporting systems to go up to your board. But I think that's good advice to sort of look at what you've already got. But a lot of companies don't report regularly to their board on employee health and safety. Depends on your industry. It's just not a component. But if you are doing a regular report on human capital to your comp committee or to your board, you build that in. But you may need to expand that. So thanks, Paul. So we just were talking about reporting to the board, and I guess under the heading, Ross, companies are facing what we've heard is companies who have withdrawn their guidance are needing to fill the vacuum, and investors give companies sort of high marks for how they step forward at the initial phase of this crisis to sort of fill the gap, give information about other metrics that investors should follow about company performance. But we're really in an interesting situation here of basically sustained communication with multiple constituencies. It's not just your investors, it's your employees, it's your customers, it's your business partners about what's going on. So how do you see, largely it's management is taking the role on this, but how do you see management and the board involved in this era of sort of sustained communication with multiple constituencies at a time when there's greater scrutiny than ever before maybe, and greater uncertainty in what you're telling people than ever before? So what's your advice for companies in matching this challenge of the requirement for sustained communication?
Well, it is challenging. And I think to your point earlier that it is a management responsibility for the most part. I think boards are obviously concerned about their reputation, the company's reputation, and to the extent that communications or lack of communications could be problematic in that area, the boards are going to want to see management step up there. But this is I think it's a journey that we've been on for some time, at least at Bank of America, and I think really corporate America, of and we saw it last year with the Business Roundtable and the statement of a corporation's purpose. And as we think about this at Bank of America, we do all of the different constituencies, and we have processes in place and teams and thoughtfully do this communication that you're talking about, and obviously the board is very concerned about again the way, not necessarily the message. Obviously they're concerned about any reputational issue, but they are seeing deference to management on that, as long as it's consistent with the corporate purpose. But you know, it is a multi-layered and multi-level and intentional approach across many different, all the different constituencies, whether it's suppliers, communities, customers, employees, investors, and different folks take the lead on that, where, it might be investor relations or shareholder relations on the investor side. In our communities, we've got at Bank of America, we're in the 90 largest markets in the U.S., and we've got offices there and the market presidents there, and they're involved in the communications directly with the communities as well as with the government, local government, state government, on the national level, their congressional leadership in each of those districts. So we can't overstate it, but it's certainly at the top of mind.
Yeah. And you're on the hot seat now. We also have a few audience questions. So let me do a few rapid-fire ones. So are you thinking of involving your board a little bit more in engagement with shareholders or even with employees on some of the issues that are coming up, or is this still largely a management responsibility? It may always still largely be a management responsibility, but are you thinking about involving your board more on investor engagement and maybe even employee engagement?
Well, on the investor engagement side, we've had for many years a shareholder engagement program that we run annually, and run it through the corporate governance committee, and our lead independent director participates in nearly every single shareholder engagement that we have. So there is board involvement, soup to nuts in the shareholder engagement side. Not as much on the employee side, but time will tell. I think that our board has been incredibly supportive of what senior management has done so far on the full spectrum of the crisis, and other than a few email message or blast communications to employees, I don't. At Bank of America, I don't see that as being something that will.
Okay, great. A couple other sort of questions. Sorry, but when you're holding these ad hoc board calls, I assume, but maybe I'm wrong. Are you treating them as? I would assume you're not treating them as formal board meetings so that they don't count toward attendance, or are you counting them as formal board meetings where attendance is taken and counted when it comes to reporting for SEC purposes?
Well, it's a mixture. There are some that are purely informational and voluntary, and on those we get almost every single director to participate. And then there are others where we need to conduct official business, and we check ahead of time, like who's going to be available, who's going to not be. We try not to have for the point that you make, not only the attendance, but also they want to participate.
Got it. And then final question before we get back to some of the ones we had planned on. Another one from the audience is you've got a risk management committee, and this goes to reporting. A couple of things, Paul, do you have broader sort of ESG risks and maybe the other risks that are coming out of the COVID pandemic and the social crisis stemming from racial inequality and racial injustice? Are those risks running up to your risk committee, or are those dispersed among other committees?
Well, we have our corporate governance committee, which we renamed last year the Corporate Governance, ESG, and Sustainability Committee. So it has primary responsibility for ESG matters. And our Compensation and Human Capital Committee also has responsibility for part of the S, in ESG. But I think the way the board looks at it and our chairman and CEO looks at it is a lot of this stuff isn't committee. It's the full, and he wants, and we want the full board engagement on that, and not just from the committee. So most of our committee work during the crisis has been kind of business as usual in that committee, and then the crisis-related things are
that's
we do at the full
we
board
addressed
level.
that question from the audience, because I think that's actually a really important point, because you don't want board members to feel excluded from the discussion of a crisis that's affecting the organization overall. And frankly, if you label something, oh well, that's just an employee risk, or that's just this sort of, no, this is all business risk. It's all huge risk for the company that really rises to the board level that needs to be characterized as that. Sometimes it's even existential risk. Then it really can't just be categorized and shunted off to a committee. Maybe for a deeper dive in some areas, but it needs to come to the full board. I think that's a great observation, Ross.
Yeah, and to get the full spectrum of all the things that are going on, and you want the full board to have a grip on that. And
okay,
so
last question before you get off the hot seat, Ross. And don't worry, Paul, Rusty, you and Kelly are going to get back into the game here, and feel free to weigh in on any of these as well. But, we talked a little bit about communications with investors, and obviously your shareholders are a critical constituency as you're making your way through these current crises and beyond. This year, B of A got a couple of shareholder proposals relating to two topics that have been there and I don't think are going to go away. One is related to gender and racial pay equity, and the other actually is related to the BRT statement of a purpose of a corporation. Now, neither of those got much support. I'm not interested in all the mechanics with the particular votes, but can you talk about what you heard from when you engaged with your investors on those issues of racial and gender pay equity, and what you heard from investors when you're talking to them about the purpose of the corporation, what you heard this year, and what you think that might portend for the future?
Yeah. So we had received a gender pay equity shareholder proposal for the last 2 or 3 years, and during last year in our engagement program, the proposal didn't get very much support, but we in the process of our engagement and the proxy solicitation, we asked investors, okay, you may not like this particular thing that the shareholders requested. What would you like in terms of more transparency in gender pay, minority pay? And we got a lot of feedback from investors, and that led over the summer of 2019 and fall to us preparing, and we finally released in late fall our first human capital management report, which we call a Great Place to Work report, and it's also included in the materials for this meeting. And that, so a lot of transparency on gender representation and person of color representation in the organization. And as we go through, fast forward to this year, we got another proposal on that, as you indicated, and we were able to refer to this document, and which already had just about all of the requested information in it, and so we, our investors were very pleased with that, but it really we use that as a jumping off point in our engagement this year as we're in the middle of the crisis, because it gave us a great platform to talk about, okay, you know, we're here in March, April of 2020. These, you know, these unprecedented things are happening. How are you, Bank of America, treating your employees? What are the things that you're doing? And we had the document, you know, which was very helpful in the way we could talk to investors about what we're doing, you know, all the additional benefits that we're providing, et cetera. So it's something that had been in the works for some time, and it just, the crisis just happened to dovetail with that and this particular proposal. But really, as we, you know, as we entered in our shareholder engagement, in-season engagement, investors didn't want to talk as much about the proposals. They really wanted to hear, you know, a window into the boardroom of what is happening right now. What is the board thinking about right now while we're in the middle of this crisis? And so that was one of the lessons that I would, you know, pass on to others. Is, of course, we're, you know, we and you know, most of U.S. companies are through the proxy season now. But it, you know, the investors and what we expect in the fall as we really roll up our sleeves in engagement with them, they want to know, they want a window into how, you know, how the board is thinking about a lot of these human capital issues. And you know, we had, as I said, we had a document that we could speak from, which was fortunate. But you know, I think other corporates should consider that kind of transparency. And we saw it last week. The New York City comptroller sent a number of letters to their companies, you know, requesting additional transparency on gender and
yeah, Rusty,
person of color pay. So.
I was going to say, this is consistent. Paul, we'll all jump in. This is consistent with what we're hearing. As you all know, we spend a lot of time with the big institutional investors to understand, you know, what are the issues they care about in terms of governance and in terms of nominating committees. And over the past 5 years, human capital management oversight of corporate culture has continuously increased. In the last 6 months in our engagement with investors and all the big ones that you would know, this crisis has really focused their attention on this because all the issues that Ross named and new ones that have come up because of it, they want to ensure that the workforces continue to get the appropriate attention and continue to ensure that a culture is still trying to be created in a virtual environment, which is really hard because over time, culture actually you need to re-engage. You've got to spend some time with people to build that culture, to build that trust, and building that takes time. So this continued emphasis on human capital management broadly is not a surprise, and frankly needs to be encouraged.
Yeah, and Paul, thanks, Rusty.
Yeah. Picking up on Ross's point, I mean, I think, you know, a lot of the ESG reporting, and this group probably lives this, but I think it does kind of point to the fact that, you know, it may be new disclosure, it's new reporting, right? It may not be quantitative in all cases, right? But it's disclosure and it's real. And so I think what I've seen for some clients, and happily not for many, but you know, unless it does work through the usual channels and the right group have looked at it and you're ready to live by it, when things turn down, it can be a bit of an albatross, right, that it's out there and you sort of made statements that you're not really ready to live by or you went too far. So I think if just that piece on the reporting is just for this group as we think about the board and certainly from the management team, just to make sure what we're saying, we're ready to, that we've kind of gone through the organization, we're ready to stand by it from all angles. And then to loop back to the prior question on the board, to pile on with Ross, I mean, I think I'm seeing what Ross is seeing, which is certainly, you know, financial institutions, the risk committee, like they've got a regulatory mandate, so their plate is full from the get-go. So I think when I think about board governance, you know, the audit committee, it's hard to get people to serve on audit committees because that's another brimming plate. Risk committee is sort of close second and maybe the sleeper in terms of, like, gosh, doesn't get as much notoriety from the accounting firms as they try and figure out where people want to serve and they survey, but that is a challenging role. So I do see it with the Corporate Governance Committee, and that it's similar to what Ross said. It's certainly of late they've got sort of the primary, the deeper dive, but it's by no means sort of left with them to handle that.
Right. All really great points. So, yeah, let me just pause because we're going to shift the conversation a little bit. But I mean, what we've heard are increased communication with the board, engaging your full board on these crisis management topics. Think about whether your CEO is up to this, and the notions of engagement and empathy are really important. Work through your normal processes for board reporting, augment them as necessary, but don't try to create a whole new system over here. I think we heard that. And Ross, I love what you said about engaging with shareholders, which is, companies sometimes focus on, we defeated that proposal, we're done. But what you did is you said, okay, well, we did fine on it, but let's have that broader conversation what investors actually want. And I think that's what we're hearing too from investors. They are really focused on companies and how they're addressing social issues, largely human capital is one of them. We actually have a working group focusing on that at the conference board, so more to come. So let's shift the conversation a little bit. So we're talking about boards right now in this time of crisis. There are really increased burdens on the board. And I think we can maybe pull up a slide here. We've got a soon-to-be released report from the conference board talking about the pace of change within boards. So it's interesting. We are seeing an increase of directors below the C-suite. You can look at it one way. It's nearly doubled, but it's only gone from 4.7% to 8.9% in 2019. Women still represent under 20% of public company directors. That's, in fact, 18.5%. That's an increase of just 4 points since 2016. The average age of directors remains about 63, and the average tenure of departing directors is about 12 years, higher at the S&P 500. And we've also found that boards actually are not implementing their overboarding policies in a way that may meet investor expectations even. So here's a question. Paul Riddell, what do you make of the pace of change here? Boards don't tend to move as fast as society or as fast as companies, but what do you think about the current pace of change we've seen thus far? And then we'll turn to another question about the future.
It's interesting. I think in a way I felt something that's actually, I don't think it's surprising, right? In a way, because the companies in their spot, they can disclose, right? And we can report what's going on. But until there is sort of a real drive from the investor base who are going to vote, and sort of in the engagement efforts like Ross is leading with his company, right, to talk to them, and until they say loudly, we want this. Certainly, there's the California model where you can sort of impose it from the outside. So, but putting that aside, my focus goes to really the asset managers, right, and large investors wielding large amounts. How badly do you want this? And I think there's an interesting debate. One of the SEC commissioners with whom I don't often end up on the same side, but in terms of mandating disclosure, Commissioner Reutemann recently had an interesting point, which is, fine, we can put this on Roth at B of A to disclose more on ESG, but if you as the asset managers are selling products that are supposed to be forward-thinking, do we need to go a generation back to sort of say, how are you defining this? What are you setting up, and what are you doing about it at the asset manager level? But I think that's the key. Even reading as ISS and Glass Lewis formulate their policies, like how loudly are they? If they do the same thing that Roth does, right, across maybe an even larger number of asset managers, they ask every year, what do you want us to do? And then their mandate is to go do it. At those two proxy advisors. And so you kind of say to yourself, well, if we expect it to move more quickly, then it's got to come from the people who wield the vote. And right now, it's there. I mean, if you read their annual engagement efforts, they will summarize for us. It's all publicly available what they're hearing. And they hear about this pace of change. It doesn't surprise me from the folks who are voting.
Got it. So let's ask our audience, whether people think the dam's about to break here. And, do you think we're going to see significant changes? Let's pull up the question there. Yeah, do you think we're going to see significant changes in board composition, diversity, tenure, lower average age, in the next couple of years in light of the current health and economic crises? Yes, significant change, some change, not much, no particular opinion.
Oh, I like the real-time feature.
Isn't this great? No, it's like watching a horse race. And partly coming around the corner, significant change. Oh, losing some ground here, you know?
Better than the AP.
Yeah. Okay. That's pretty good. I think we've got it directionally. Oh, all right. Let's okay, let's declare this is like a shareholders meeting. Let's declare the polls closed. So Rusty, you know, you've got 70% of the folks seeing some change in the next couple of years, and then on either side, 12.5, significant change, no, not much. What do you make of that from your vantage point at a leading search firm?
Well, it all depends on how you define significant.
Wait, now this is being spoken like a lawyer. Come on.
Exactly.
Which you are.
I did go to law school. I did go to law school.
You did?
So just to put some context around it, we have a really good vantage point at this. We did last year 250 board searches in the Fortune 1000. So that gives us a very good sample size. And in every search, except where the requirement was a sitting public company CEO, there was a request, significant request for diversity, either gender or ethnic. And even in those sitting CEO searches, they would say, we know the number is small, but try. And, you know, so in every search, it's important. What has changed in the past 8 weeks is that people realize that this is an issue that's getting a lot of visibility. Ethnic now, gender for the past several years. And I will say there will be some change, and we are seeing it in our search requests. Mm-hmm. Existing searches are being pivoted to please find us a person of color, or please find us a woman if you can. And it has been across industry, across sector. Now, this is a bit of a self-selecting group. This is a company that, right, you know, our clients are companies that are already using search firms. The real test will be the companies that do it themselves. Mm-hmm. Because when you do it yourselves, you're using the existing networks of board members. And unless those people have a diverse group, a diverse network and diverse group of friends and professional colleagues, the results will tend to be less diverse. Mm-hmm. So there will be some change. We're seeing it in our work. We're seeing what, you know, Vanguard last August started asking for more disclosure. Quietly last week, ISS started asking for more information. But the key issue is there are plenty of diverse candidates outside of the sitting CEO role. And that's the challenge of the NOMCO. NOMCO, I want a sitting CEO. I want a sitting CFO, preferably in the Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000. Mm-hmm. That pool is small. When you say, I want a sitting executive, that pool is dramatically larger and allows for much greater diversity. And there are really important skills that can be added to the board from that set. So, you know, we don't have to push our clients. We urge them, and they get it immediately. Once they see the data, they get it immediately. They open their aperture, and they have a greater opportunity for more diverse placements on their board. Last year, 25% of our board placements were people of color, and 48% were women. So that's how I can say confidently, and those are placements. Mm-hmm. That's how I can say confidently change is coming, because we would expect those numbers to be as high, and on ethnic diversity even higher this year because of the increased requests by boards.
Okay. Rusty, can I ask one question? Or maybe this is simplistic too, but say you're, do you have clients saying, for this round one, only bring me diverse, whether it's gender or racial candidates? Like, don't bring me the other. for this round, I only want diverse candidates, and let's see how we do. And don't push. You can push later. But right now, I want to see diverse candidates only.
Absolutely. That is probably 1 out of every 4 searches, 1 out of every 5 searches. We get that request.
Yeah.
And usually it's easy. It's a board that does not have any ethnic diversity, or, for example, I'm not going to name any clients, but this morning we sent out to our clients an analysis of a lot of current data on ethnic diversity on boards. And unfortunately, it's only about 16%. And again, this is self-reported data. This is people actually doing research and looking. There are 172 boards in the S&P 500 that have no African American.
Yeah.
And my team actually went and checked every board. Now, it's a visual test. It's other research tests. Black Enterprise had done that research. But it's those type of boards that say, we must have some additional diversity. To a lot of other boards' credit, they're already diverse. They want to keep the numbers up. 40% diverse combination of men and women, even 50% diverse. They said, we are not going backward. You must bring us a diverse slate. And only, to your point, Paul, we only want to see in the first round diverse candidates. And if we can't find something there, then we'll look at a broader pool.
Right. And that's, I can tell you from personal experience, that does happen. Now, occasionally you toss in, there may be one white guy in there too, possibly, just because there's someone who's truly extraordinary. But it's a mirror image of, frankly, what searches used to be, right? And that's interesting. So that's, Ross, that's one way to break the logjam, is to have your committee say, okay, we're not looking for this particular job as CEO or CFO. We're looking for this skill set. This comes from one of our questions here. This is the skill set we're looking for. Bring us diverse candidates. Are there other ways that you've seen at Bank of America that help to broaden the talent pool, broaden the diversity, broaden the skill set of the skill sets that your directors bring, that are sort of effective ways of breaking what still is a dam at a lot of companies?
Sure. Well, I think Rusty was, absolutely spot on. If the lens is looking at corporate, a corporate executive, Bank of America, we've broadened it, and the governance committee to look at academia or other, large, complex organizations. It might be nonprofit. It could be something else that where an executive has experience in oversight or management of, a large, diverse group of employees, complex issues, those sorts of things. So that's one, is saying it's not just the C-suite, it's, a layer down, a step down. It's also looking outside of corporate America. And I think, one of the things in Bank of America, we have 6 female directors, and we have 2 African American male directors, and that's just gender and ethnicity diversity. But what we're seeing in this crisis is and it's in the boardroom, and the directors are seeing it, is the overwhelming importance of diverse thought and diverse perspectives in dealing with all of the laundry list of issues that that we had at the very first of the program. And it's going to be the rare individual who can address, who has expertise and familiarity and comfort in discussing all of those different issues. And so that's why that having diversity of thought and experience, which often comes with diversity of gender and ethnicity, That's why it's so critical, and the directors in the boardroom are, I think, they're seeing the fruits of the push that we've had over time to add more diversity, and it's showing up, and I hope it's showing up, and certainly as a Bank of America in the way that they're approaching issues.
Do a little plug. Conference Board just put out a piece on the importance of demographic and cognitive diversity and how to get there. It's a director notes. Well, please read it. It's really fascinating. And Rusty, so question for you to wrap up. So you're trying to bring on folks from below the C-suite. You're trying to bring on maybe younger directors. You're trying to bring on people who haven't served on a board before, maybe sometimes. What's a couple quick pieces of advice in a minute or two of what boards should be doing in the identification, recruitment, and particularly maybe in the onboarding and engagement process to get the most out of those new directors and help to make sure they succeed?
Sure. First, in the recruiting process, open your aperture, because one of the biggest challenges we find is it happened this morning on a call. 45-year-old CEO of a tech company serves on a couple of great boards, and feedback was, well, we're not sure, and it was about age. So open the aperture and make sure that the committee and the board is truly willing to accept someone who's younger. And then on onboarding, customized onboarding programs. So one of the biggest mistakes companies make is putting everyone through the same thing, whether you're a new director or whether you are an experienced director. And taking the time to build a customized program for someone where this is their first board will accelerate their impact and accelerate their performance on the board. And general counsels and corporate secretaries play a huge role in that, partnering, and that's an important word, partnering with the NOMCO chairs and the chairs and lead independent directors of the board, so that this person understands the business, the company, the history, and then feels as though they can ask questions. That's the board leadership part, where they can be part of the board pretty quickly. So customized onboarding, really a critical step to improve new director effectiveness from below the C-suite, because they often don't have much board exposure, not to speak of board experience.
Right. No, that's terrific. And spend some time with your corporate secretary. You know, this is a place where the corporate secretary can really add value in providing the new directors with a sense of how the place works on paper and how it works in practice, and can give a real sense of the history of the company so that the new director comes in and understands some of the lore as well as the law.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really.
All on the topic of the law, too, whether it's face-to-face or behind the scenes, putting somebody like Ross in the position, there's just a lot to know in terms of the law. Right now that there is federal law on corporate governance, right? That you can lean on outside counsel to come up with these materials, whether or not they present them. But to Rusty's point, get them up that curve. The materials exist at all the big firms. Let's pull them together and get them in Ross's hands so we can sit down.
Right, right. And walk them through it. So it's not just, here's this document, go read it, but it's walk them through it, talk them through it, right? Well, look, Ross and other Paul and Rusty, it's just great to have had this discussion with you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for watching today. You'll see we've got a couple of upcoming webcasts here. We hope we take the time to watch them. Conference Board has a wealth of resources available in the download section. And a final request before a really final request is please complete an evaluation form for today's webcast. Thank you for the questions we've got, but getting your evaluation forms will help us improve these in the future. And then the final request is stay well, stay healthy, be safe, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.